Let's look in more detail at those great challenges: alleviating poverty, addressing the crisis of inequality, looking at how to solve the various environmental crises, and how to achieve peace on this planet. And we'll start with the question of poverty in the midst of plenty. Looking at a world map that is color-coded according to the average income of each part of the world tells us a lot. What we see is a huge variation that is also a geographic variation between the rich and the poor worlds. Now, the World Bank keeps a classification of countries depending on their average incomes, technically their average gross domestic product per person, and categorizes countries into four major categories. The first is low-income countries, which, according to the categorizations of the World Bank towards the end of the year 2023, were countries that have a per capita GDP of less than $1,135. So it's a line that's artificially drawn, but countries that have income below that line are classified as low-income countries. And then as the income per capita rises, there are three higher level categories. At the top end are the countries that are called high-income countries. And at the end of the year 2023, for example, the World Bank's categorization was that high-income countries are those that have an income per capita or a gross domestic product per capita of greater than $13,845 US per person. In the middle are the lower middle income countries, between roughly $1,000 and $4,000 per person, and the upper middle income countries, roughly between $4,000 and $13,000 per person. Now, if we look at the populations of different parts of the world in those four categories, what we see is that roughly, and I'm speaking roughly, about 1 billion people, a little bit less, but about 1 billion people live in the low-income countries. About 1 billion people, a little bit more, live in the high-income countries. So that's 2 billion of the 8 billion. And of the 6 billion remaining, roughly half and half, 3 billion live in the lower middle income countries, and roughly 3 billion live in the upper middle income countries. So it's a huge gap if you think about it. Some countries are in the low income range, say $600 per person, whereas some countries, like my own, the United States, is in the high income range, above $60,000 per person. So the gap is more than 100 times between a very poor country and a very rich country. The categorization also helps us to understand the geography of wealth and poverty. We see on a map that the high-income countries are rather concentrated geographically. First, in North America, Canada, and the United States, and then in Western Europe, meaning Ireland, Great Britain, and the other countries of the European Union primarily. A few countries in the Middle East, especially in the Arabian Peninsula, that are oil-rich countries. A few countries in the Far East Asian region, especially Japan and Korea, and Singapore, and a couple of countries in Oceania, in the Pacific region, Australia and New Zealand. But truly a very concentrated group. Basically countries in the North Atlantic region, that is US, Canada, and Western Europe, or a few countries in the Far East. When it comes to the low-income countries, the strong concentration of low-income countries is in sub-Saharan Africa, that is the part of Africa below the Sahara Desert, south of the Sahara Desert, and parts of South Asia and Southeast Asia. So most of the low-income countries are in Africa and in Asia, and notably South Asia and Southeast Asia. The middle-income countries are the rest of the world. Most of Latin America, meaning Mexico and Central America and South America, are in different categories of lower middle income and upper middle income countries. Much of Eurasia, including the countries of the former Soviet Union, Russia, and other neighboring countries, including China, including much of Southeast Asia, including most of the countries of Central Asia, are upper middle income or lower middle income countries, but right in the middle. So the world is very much divided in income, and the top of the heap are the North Atlantic countries and a few countries that have a close association with the North Atlantic countries like Australia and New Zealand, which were settled by the British Empire, or a couple of countries of East Asia, notably Japan and Korea. Japan being the earliest industrialized country of Asia. Well, why is the world divided in this way? We're going to do our best to understand how these large divisions of income and the persistence of poverty in the low-income countries has come about. But one clue to this is that in the fifth and sixth ages of globalization, the transoceanic empires, and especially the industrial age, it was the North Atlantic countries that had an early start, whether it was in navigation and military power or in industrialization, and they leveraged that early advantage into domination through imperial conquest of other parts of the world, and really frustrated the economic development of other parts of the world as well. So when we look at a snapshot of the world today, we are also seeing the effects of long history. And part of our aim in this course is to understand how today's circumstances are really a reflection of complex historical processes that have been underway for many, many centuries. Now, inequality or extreme poverty can show up in many forms. I have highlighted income per capita or GDP per capita, but another very, very important indicator of extreme poverty is a low life expectancy, which itself is a reflection of chronic hunger and a heavy burden of untreated disease. When we look at the world map of life expectancy at birth, that is the number of years statistically that an average person born in a given year would live based on the age-specific survival or death rates in that population, we see gaps between the longest-lived countries, those with the highest life expectancy, and those with the lowest life expectancy that are very similar to what we know from the differences of income per capita. Once again, it tends to be the case that it is the North Atlantic region and a few countries in East Asia and the countries of Oceania that have the highest longevity in the world. There's a group of countries that is somewhere in the middle. And then once again, it is sub-Saharan Africa, where the highest concentrations of countries with very low life expectancies are found. This also gives us some clues to long history. We've already noted that physical geography is a shaper of disease burdens. For example, the disease of malaria is shaped by tropical environments and even by the kinds of mosquitoes that live in those tropical environments. And Africa has been burdened, perhaps from time immemorial, with the heaviest burdens of tropical disease. This has been a burden to health and to survival, and as well to economic development. So disease burden also is a factor in whether countries find an easy pathway to escape from poverty or a great struggle to escape from poverty. Well, in our world today, fortunately, the gap of life expectancy is not 100 to 1. It's a much narrower gap than that, but in countries with low life expectancy, and notably several in sub-Saharan Africa, the life expectancy is in the 50s or low 60s, say a lifespan of 55 to 65 years. Whereas in the countries with the highest longevity, such as Japan or countries in Scandinavia, the life expectancy is well above 80 years. So the gap can be as large as 30 years of life expectancy on average between those at the bottom and those at the top. The low life expectancies in the poor countries is to an important extent a reflection of poverty itself, the inability to provide a proper healthcare system. But it also means that lives could be saved by the millions in low-income countries with the right kinds of healthcare and economic strategies. That's good news. No country in the world today should have a life expectancy of only 55 or 60 years. Every country in the world should be able to enable survival with a life expectancy of at least 70 to 75 years, if not higher. So as we explore ways to end extreme poverty, we are going to be exploring as well ways to end the deprivation or the lack of access to modern health services and public health. Because with the right kind of access, millions and millions of people every year could be saved from a premature death.